We have this kind of calling to have leadership through influence, right? So there's leadership with authority, which means you have the title, you're the CEO, you're the whoever, you have the title there. And then you have leadership through influence. And sometimes those can marry together. But other times leadership through influence really means like you don't necessarily have the title, but the way that you act, the way you behave, the way that you lead in your own right in your daily work really makes an impact in your workplaces. And so I think it's important right now for pharmacists to really understand that regardless if we have provider status or not, that we do have a seat at the table, that we are a member of the healthcare team, that we have, that we are the underutilized resource, and we need to really exert ourselves in times when oftentimes we're kind of, nudged off the table oftentimes, unfortunately.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show, where quality measurement leads to better patient outcomes. This show will be your go-to source for all things related to quality improvement and medication use in healthcare. We will hit on trending health topics as they relate to performance measurements and find common ground for payers and practitioners. We will discuss how the Equip platform can help you with your performance goals, and we will also make sure to keep you up to date on pharmacy quality news. Please note that the topics discussed are based on the information available at the date and time of recording. Information or guidelines are updated periodically, and we will always recommend that our listeners research and review any guidelines that are newly published. Buckle up and put your thinking cap on. The Quality Corner Show starts now.
Hello, Quality Corner Show listeners. Welcome back to the PQS podcast, where we focus on medication use, quality improvement, and how we can utilize pharmacists to improve patient health outcomes. I'm your host, Nick Dorich, and today's show is actually our final episode for 2021 American Pharmacist Month. Now, American Pharmacist Month occurs every October to recognize the positive contributions to public health and patient care by pharmacists. When asked about pharmacists and the role that they provide in the healthcare team, there are any number of potential answers. We all know that pharmacists are the medication experts and that pharmacists help patients and other providers to ensure that a medication action plan is safe and effective to help the patient reach a desired health outcome. Extensive knowledge about sciences, including biology and chemistry, are required for being a pharmacist, but those are not the only skill sets that are needed. In fact, pharmacists are increasingly utilized for other skills, often referenced as communication or soft skills. After all, having all of that clinical knowledge isn't very helpful if we cannot communicate effectively with either a patient or with another healthcare provider. In addition, this does require pharmacists balance that fine line of being an expert clinician while also demonstrating active leadership as a member of the healthcare team. Now, we're going to talk about that fine line today and how pharmacists can really be an expert in multiple facets. Now, I'll go ahead and introduce our guest for today, and that is Dr. Bonnie Hui-Callahan. Bonnie, welcome to the Quality Corner Show.
Hey, Nick, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, excited to have you here. And before we talk about our topic of being a clinician and a leader in healthcare, we need to hear about you. So what's your background in healthcare? What's your background in pharmacy? And what do you do now?
Yeah, so I did the pre-pharmacy program at USC, University of Southern California, and that led me into pharmacy school at USC as well. So I've been a practicing pharmacist for over 10 years now, a graduate of 2010. And during that time, I've had the privilege of kind of dabbling in different areas of pharmacy. And then I've also had the opportunity to work in academia in the experiential education office for a local school of pharmacy. And I currently work at a startup PBM, also building clinical programs and being able to make an impact that way. So in addition to that, one of my passion projects this year has been starting something called the Clinician-Leader. And that's probably going to be the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. But I'm happy to be serving or be founder of the Clinician-Leader. And really our mission is to help transform clinicians into leaders of influence, regardless of their title. So again, happy to be here and happy to kind of dive into the conversation with you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Like a true USC Trojan, you have continued to fight on in many facets of your pharmacy career. And you've done, I mean, that's one of the great things about being a pharmacist, right? And you can go from different career fields and you've managed to do that transition through different aspects, and each one builds on the other. And it's important, I think, right? Pharmacist as the medication expert, there are different ways we can leverage that experience, that clinical knowledge. And we need more pharmacists that are actively taking on new and different roles. And Bonnie, you're absolutely right. We are going to talk about your experience with your group, the Clinician-Leader, today. But before we get into that and the questions, we're going to take a minute to pause and we'll roll the breakdown.
Now it's time for the breakdown. As Quality Corner show host, Nick will ask 3 main topic questions. Our guests will have a chance to respond, and there will be some discussion to summarize the key points. This process will repeat for the second and third questions, which will wrap up the primary content for this recording. After that, expect to end on a closing summary, usually containing a bonus question. Now that we have described the process, let's jump into the questions.
All right, Bonnie. So we're going to jump into our conversation today, and our focus is that fine balance for a pharmacist, being a clinician, being an active healthcare leader. You've already started your own group, the Clinician-Leader, and we want to hear about that. So what is this organization? What is the focus? And how does it help develop pharmacists as a healthcare leader?
Yeah, I love talking about this. And, really it kind of goes back to, pharmacy school days. As I reflect back on my pharmacy school experience, what it really did was help develop those I'll call them hard skills, all the clinical skills that are involved with being a clinician, whether it's medicine, pharmacy, physical therapy, nursing, whatever area of practice, that you're in. Specifically for pharmacy, we learn about pharmacokinetics and pharmacogenomics and drug interactions and patient counseling and all those things that really, if we were to take an analogy of building a house, that would build the foundation for us. And for those of us who go on and do postgraduate training, that just really deepens or perhaps widens that foundation and the base. But as we get into our actual, practice, right, in the real world, shall we say, what we realize is that, we can't just survive off of those hard clinical skills. And so going back to the analogy of the house, what we need to do is really layer in over top of each other, this idea of the soft skills. I love that you mentioned that in your introduction, because that's really what it is. In order for us to really stand up and stand out as a pharmacist and a pharmacist leader, clinician leader, to make it more general, we need to have those soft skills. And that's where the clinician leader comes in. I realized as I was talking to so many of my pharmacist colleagues over the past, I would say 3 to 5 years, that we've all kind of lament that there is this gap. Whether it's us personally, where we realize, shoot, I don't know how to be a leader in my workplace right now, or we've been the recipient of poor leadership in our own workplaces, right? Which has snowballed into burnout. And trust me, I've had many, many of those conversations with colleagues. And so again, that's where kind of the impetus of clinician leaders come in. So really what we focus on in a nutshell is on emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman is kind of the thought leader behind emotional intelligence. He has the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. And just real quickly, those are self-awareness, right? So how can you read the room and can you adapt accordingly? The second is self-management. And really this gets to resilience, right? How do we deal with failure? When I didn't match out of school for residency, that really destroyed me, right? I didn't really know how to handle that emotionally, psychologically. How do I pick myself up from here, right? So that really kind of led me on this path of understanding the importance of resilience and then teaching that and mentoring others after me. The third is other awareness, or really this is empathy, right? And I try to teach my kids this all the time, right? Put yourself in the shoes of other people. How would that person feel, right? And we do the same thing. I do the same thing, and I try to put my feet in the end user, whether it's the patient or if I'm kind of now more in an admin role. How would this play out for the end user? And then finally, and probably my favorite, is relationship management, right? We don't have a course on this in school, right? So, but it's this idea of like, how do you talk to strangers, right? How do you hold a conversation? How do you position yourself to your boss for a raise, right? How do you position yourself in an interview to say, yeah, I am the best candidate? How do you do that? And it's funny because I was talking to, I met a neighbor of mine, happens to be a pharmacist. I just met him just a few weeks ago, and he's in pharma. And I said, you know what tips do you have for people who have this really strong clinical background, who never really cared about pharma or going into pharma in pharmacy school? Right? There's always a small group of people who were interested, and nobody else really was. Everyone wanted to focus on the clinical stuff in pharmacy school. And I said, now I have so many colleagues 10 years out who are like, I wish I went into pharma. I want to get into there. So I said, what is your tip? What are your tips for breaking into that industry? And he said, you know what? We love people who have strong clinical backgrounds. Really what we're looking for is that added ability to talk to people. Can you carry on a conversation? Can you take a random stranger out to dinner and talk with them and really build a relationship? He said, that's the piece that we're looking for. And that kind of just really further excited me with this mission with Clinician-Leader, because this idea that we need to learn how to do that. We need to learn how to manage relationships well. So those are really the four pillars of emotional intelligence that we really talk through and talk on. And I would say the last portion, if I were to add something in addition to kind of soft skills, is this idea of innovation and creation. So do we see a need, or can we see a need as leaders, and not just seeing the need and just dwelling on the problem, right? But how do we then create a solution to address it? And so again, kind of going back to Clinician-Leader is my passion project. That's what I'm trying to do here. Is I see this need for building up the soft skills amongst clinicians. And so for Clinician-Leader, it's kind of this one step that I'm taking slowly but surely to be able to help address that need. And really what we do with Clinician-Leader is it's a digital course kind of business that offers also coaching. And I've partnered up with my physician executive father-in-law, who's taught leadership for many, many years. And so he really is the one that takes the lead on teaching us and building community around leadership amongst clinicians.
And it's a great story, and there's a lot that we can expand upon. And fortunately, some of my follow-up questions are built into our second and third questions that we have scripted for today. So I'll be brief at this point. And with the group, and it sounds like you've already had folks that have gone through this course or training at this point. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. We've had 2 live workshops this year, as well as 2 signature courses that that are about 6 weeks long that we've been able to do this year.
Excellent. Now, so my question to this part is, well, what type of pharmacist is this geared towards? It sounds like it really, in my mind, is, hey, this could be for any pharmacist that's looking to take that kind of next step, build their more kind of executive, administrative type of skills, communication skills. But, from your standpoint, who should be looking at a program like this?
Yeah. So there's really kind of 2 buckets, I guess, that I would say. The first is like that new practitioner kind of group, right? That they're kind of fresh out with those clinical skills. They're ready to go, but they need that kind of extra layer of the soft skills to understand what to expect and how to kind of really rise above when they start in their workplaces. So that would be kind of the first bucket. The second bucket really is those mid-career folks, those who are like 10 to 20 years in practice. They've kind of been around the bend and kind of seen some of those perhaps examples of poor leadership or realize within themselves that they need more kind of growth and stepping stones for themselves. So those would be, I would say, the 2 kind of focus areas for us here.
That sounds great. And we'll talk a little bit more on some of the other key details. One of the aspects I really liked in your description was, how do we address stressful situations or problems? And that's one part I think that I've seen that not just pharmacists, but a lot of healthcare providers in general, right? We know how to deal with the patient. We know how to deal with the medication. But when there's other things that come around, we're not necessarily trained in how to deal with that part of it. And that takes a bit of a different skill set, and somewhat that's really where experience matters, being able to address that. And that part I'll be interested. We may get into talking about that later, but we'll go ahead. We'll move to our second question. And for our second question, really want to know and understand, from your perspective, why is it important here and now in 2021 for pharmacists to embrace, we'll call it, their leadership potential? You talked about maybe it's because of bad experiences, maybe it's a change in career, but just generally from where we are in healthcare today and how a pharmacist is expected to practice, why is it important now for pharmacists to embrace their leadership calling?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question. And I think to address that, I'll kind of start with, taking a step back for pharmacists in general, kind of as part of the healthcare system. And then I'll talk about kind of pharmacists on a personal level. So from more systematic level, I mean, as you know, we've been fighting for provider status for goodness knows how long now. And we will continue to kind of fight that fight. But I don't want us as pharmacists as a whole to kind of lose sight of the fact that we, regardless of the quote unquote title, right, or the designated authority that whatever governing body is going to eventually give us one day, that we have this kind of calling to have leadership through influence, right? So there's leadership with authority, which means you have the title, you're the CEO, you're the whoever, you have the title there. And then you have leadership through influence. And sometimes those can marry together, but other times leadership through influence really means like you don't necessarily have the title, but the way that you act, the way you behave, the way that you lead in your own right in your daily work really makes an impact in your workplaces. And so I think it's important right now for pharmacists to really understand that regardless if we have provider status or not, that we do have a seat at the table, that we are a member of the healthcare team, that we have, that we are the underutilized resource, and we need to really exert ourselves in times when oftentimes we're kind of, nudged off the table oftentimes, unfortunately. So that's kind of on kind of the bigger scale of things for pharmacy as a profession as a whole. What I will also say as on an individual level is that it's important for us to embrace our leadership potential because, at the core as human beings, we long to make impact, right? Whether it's on one person, right? Or whether it's on a group or, however many people, we are made to have impact on other people, and that drives us. And so really at the end of the day, embracing our leadership potential addresses burnout. It addresses, because if we every day can make an impact on people, that makes us feel good, right? Whenever someone says, oh my gosh, you're the reason I'm here, or you're the reason I'm doing this today, I mean, that lights us up, right? And so it's important to note here that we as pharmacists have a responsibility to lead, and we have the capability to lead. And I've talked to so many people that say, leadership, leadership isn't for me. I'm not good enough. I'm not expert enough. I don't have the experience enough. That person should do it instead. But what I want to emphasize, and what we do emphasize at Clinician-Leader, is that, it's not about the years of experience, right? It's as long as you're 2 steps ahead, heck, if you're 1 step ahead, you have a responsibility to lead the person right behind you, right? So, think about like if you're a new hire, right? You're new hire, everything is new to you. You don't really know what you're doing. 12 weeks into your role, someone else is also hired on that same team with your same job description. Now you're in the place, to train the person behind you. And you think, well, I've only been here 12 weeks. But the other side of the coin is you have been here 12 weeks. You've been through onboarding. You've been through XYZ. You now have a responsibility to lead the person who just started, right? And so it's this idea that, don't think of it as I don't have this title. I don't have the number of years of experience. Think of it as you have influence no matter what. And you need to claim that. And we are responsible as pharmacists to do that. And in doing that, we are really helping our not only other people, but we're helping ourselves to address this idea of burnout, and really by stepping into what we're supposed to be doing as human beings, which is helping and influencing other people.
Yeah, Bonnie, it makes me think when most people describe or think about leadership, it's based on a title, a position that either someone is appointed to or elected to. And that might be the most simple and straightforward, version of leadership. But just because someone is appointed or in that position, that doesn't mean they're actively displaying or showing leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And even beyond that, sometimes leadership is knowing when to step back to let others grow or expand in their own skill set. I know I've gotten a number of experiences like that for myself, either when I was in a position of formal leadership and or when not in a formal part of leadership, where you can still display, being a leader, or sometimes being the best leader is letting others take over, grow, and expand from themselves. As I'm thinking about this, and Bonnie, you've mentioned kind of the course that you go through for those that are interested. So what is that learning like? Is this really a focus on the different ways that leadership can be exuded, or that it can be shown, or different ways for people to feel comfortable? Do you mind getting into the weeds for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the focus of the kind of the live, what we call boot camp that we do, which is kind of a short, 1 to 3 day kind of event, is addressing kind of those mindset blocks that are hindering us from stepping into leadership. So the first mental kind of block that we work through is leadership experts aren't. And so this idea that I'm not expert enough, right, that I just referred to. So we kind of, address that as number one, because we see that that is like the biggest barrier. And so once we kind of address that, we move into the idea that like, okay, so now that we kind of understand our place in as leaders, how do we exhibit that, right? So the second kind of topic we address is leadership is life, right? Leadership isn't just the hat that you wear when you go to work and then you take it off and you come home and you're a different person, right? It's these transferable skills that it starts in the home and then it goes into the workplace, but it should come back in the home, right? So this idea of integrity, where you're kind of the same person through and through wherever you are. And also the idea that you got to take care of yourself and your family and your home life, because that bleeds into your workplace life. So that's kind of the second step that we then talk through. Leadership is life. And then the third one is kind of seeking the opportunities. When we call it, the knocks, like knocking on the door. And you addressed that perfectly, Nick, how, so you said sometimes we're given those moments of leadership, right? And it falls in our lap, whether we like it or not. And it's our responsibility to step up. Other times we apply for it, or we, do campaigns and we get voted for it, whatever the case may be. But what are those opportunities, and are we constantly seeking them, or are we shying away from them? And so how do we step into opportunities of leadership when we are given those things, or how do we seek those out so that we can further influence through our leadership?
All right, Bonnie, that's going to take us to our third question for today, pretty much perfectly, actually. And this question is around, well, how and where can pharmacists display active leadership, not just in their practice setting, but in their daily life, in their community? And as you've talked about this, I'll just go ahead and I'll point this out because it can be easy for us to compartmentalize different aspects of ourselves, right? There's Bonnie at work, there's Bonnie, the team leader, Bonnie, the clinical pharmacist. There's going to be home life, right? Where, at home, Bonnie, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're going to be, a friend, you're going to be a mentor. Being part of leadership, I think, is being able to know, which of those mindsets is the right one to kind of be almost a dominant personality trait at different times, right? Because sometimes, especially in the world that we live in now, having the experience and the familiarity with, being part of a family, and hey, if you've got coworkers that are struggling with family work balance, sometimes you need to let that part of your personality leadership take over compared to something else. But as part of the clinician leader group, how does the group represent or recommend to those folks how to look for active leadership roles? And some of this, again, may be formal, official, elected or volunteer position. Some of it may be things that are just ways to be involved. So would love to hear from you where you see opportunities for pharmacists to step up as active leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are so many opportunities for pharmacists to be stepping up. You're right. We wear the hats that we wear. Really, it should be not multiple hats, but kind of like a wide rim hat that have all the things all together, right? As a pharmacist and as a mom, I think that there's kind of this great marriage of skills and skill sets that we bring to the table, whether it's at work or at home. I asked my 4-year-old at drop off today, who's the leader at home, and he said, mommy, you are, right? And so he looks to me as this leader, and I think as parents we have this incredible opportunity to have authority over our children, and and again, that's where our responsibility comes in. But I think one of the kind of models that Dr. Callahan, who teaches our leadership courses, talks about is the 4C model, or we call it the force model. And there's 4 C's in it. And the first is character, right? So kind of keeping in mind that at the core of things, right, we lead through our character and who we are. And again, that's whether it's in a workplace or it's in the home, it's in our neighborhoods. The second is competence. And as clinician leaders, we have that foundational skill, and we have a responsibility to keep that up, right? And so we need to be competent in the skills and the ways that we help our patients and whoever our end users are. The third is context. Again, this kind of goes back to the emotional intelligence portion, but we always need to kind of keep in mind, what context are we in, and really this speaks to like, who is our sphere of influence right now? If you're in a retail setting, my sphere of influence is my immediate pharmacy team, but also the patients that I serve in this community. If I'm now back at home, my context is my home life and my children, and that impacts how I'm representing myself to them and all my behaviors. And so really understanding like context. And then the fourth C is communication. As leaders, I think we really need to be cognizant of the way that we communicate. Are we clear in how we communicate? Are we transparent in our communication? Are we speaking to at a fourth grade, fifth grade level when we're talking with patients, or, who are we talking to? And if we're talking to the C-suite, are we keeping it nice and concise, right? They don't have time to read long emails. So really adapting our communication accordingly. And that's, really the fourth kind of C to this model of how we are a leader and how we apply leadership in all facets of our life.
Yeah, great. I'm thinking, Bonnie, as you were explaining and dropping off your 4-year-old, was thinking, the example of the leader. I was expecting a 4-year-old to probably go with Captain America or something like that. And I'm sure there's a leadership lesson with your 4 C's that could be modified for Star Wars or Marvel characters if we were thinking about a younger audience that probably works at home as well. It's a great point and a great conversation for us. It's even as you said, it's wearing different hats. I'm almost thinking it could be like a trucker hat with different patches and knowing which one of those really take in the lead, for these different situations. We're not going to be perfect, and that's okay, right? We're all human, but it's knowing when to, let others take lead and being comfortable with that. We all want to be in kind of control of our situations. That always can't work out, but it's also really rewarding. And I think this is the other part about being a leader. It's incredibly rewarding, perhaps nothing more rewarding than when you see others able to take that step and have that confidence that they haven't displayed or haven't shown before and step into those kind of roles. That really is the best sign. And again, something that I know when I've worked with students, new pharmacists, again, more seasoned pharmacists, that's the part when you're seeing a really change in behavior. That's what we're really seeking. And that's part of why we thought this conversation was really appropriate for the Quality Corner show. Our focus here is on quality improvement, and that, we talk about it in the realm of healthcare, but each of us getting better as a person to do the job, to do the role that we're built into is an important aspect. So we all have to really accept that leadership role may come in different forms for each of us, but it's absolutely essential.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's so essential. And it's something, again, it's not really talked about a lot, especially after practice or after we get out of school, really how to build in those soft skills. I don't know if you've heard of the principle. There's something called the Peter Principle that I recently discovered. It was actually started or founded by this guy named Dr. Peter back in 1969, I think. But he basically says that, people essentially keep rising up in organizations or get promoted until they finally land in a job that they're completely incapable of doing. And what he meant by that was because when you start off, you think, you start off as an individual contributor most of the time, right? When you're in the community pharmacy, you're like the staff pharmacist, you're, doing the verification, all parts of integral parts of workflow. Well, someone up above will say, well, notice, oh, you're meeting all your metrics, you're doing great, let's promote you. Right. So you're now promoted to a role where instead of doing all the technical workflow stuff, you're now put in a position where you're expected to manage people. Right. And then if you think about it, the progression keeps going there, where basically instead of the skill set that you were originally hired for and promoted for originally, which was the, technical stuff, you're now in a position where you got to manage hundreds and hundreds of people. And many times we're not trained for that. We're not capable. And so that's why, Dr. Peter kind of coined this Peter principle of saying, like, that's generally in large corporations, especially in this country, that's what happens to us. Right. And so a lot of times you kind of blink and you realize, wait a minute, I don't have the support, or I don't have the expertise to know how to lead. Like, what do I do? And so again, there's this gap, and that's where, Clinician-Leader really wants to help try to fill that gap for those who, whether you're fresh out of school or kind of mid into your career, to provide that leadership support and soft skills development.
Well, I'm glad that this description or further discussion led us on this. I don't know if it's a tangent, but led us to the topic of the Peter Principle, because that will be my new item to research while having my morning coffee tomorrow. So Bonnie, thank you for that. And I'll go ahead. Well, that'll wrap up our conversation, for today's show. And this has been a great conversation. It's incredibly important for us as pharmacists, for us as healthcare providers, to be comfortable, to be effective as leaders. And that can come in many different ways. We've talked about the different ways that wearing that leadership hat can be important to improving patient care, which is the true ultimate goal of why we're doing what we're doing. But that'll end our conversation for now. And Bonnie, I know that when we get to the end of the episode, we're always asking our guest about something that's not necessarily relative to our topic of the day, but do want to hear from you. What has been your self-improvement goal or program in the last, we'll say, year and a half? This can be either in your personal life, this could be in your professional work, but what have you been working on?
Yeah. So does brushing up on my bartending skills count?
That does. I can tell you, Bonnie, my wife did that very thing in this past year, and it was hard work for me to be the taste tester, but I can say it counts.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure that was a hard thing. Yeah, no, that's something that I've been, especially during the pandemic, have tried to really learn more and more different types of recipes and stuff, and that's been fun for me. But the other thing is I have been trying to kind of keep up just some form of daily exercise. So I try to get out for a run at least 15 minutes a day, and while I do that, I listen to podcasts. And so, in addition to PQS Quality Corner Show, I listen to entrepreneurial type podcasts, specifically around course creation, which is where the Clinician-Leader came from. So those are the other forms of self-improvement I've been working on this year.
Well, Bonnie, I'm surprised to some extent that being an active mother of 4 isn't exercise enough, but kudos to you and your devotion to that. Thinking about this, and I already referenced a bit some Star Wars and Marvel characters, but is there any way that you give kind of leadership lessons through some of these different characters with your kids? Is there a good leadership lesson that you provide for the kids that you've seen through some of the media consumption for some of those maybe Disney properties, since you live near the land of Disney?
That's true. You know what? This is a hard one for me because I am sad to admit that I am not an avid kind of follower of Star Wars. I mean, I've seen them with my kids. I do know that there is a new animated version called Visions. Is that correct? Okay, I had to double check with my husband last night, but he was excited to tell me that. And maybe this is the lesson: is that he was excited to watch it with my 8-year-old, who's our oldest, because of kind of the group bonding that will happen as a result. And so I think there's this idea that when it comes to mentorship, right, it's kind of taking someone under your wing and kind of not just throwing them into the fire, but being with them and partnering with them. And so them watching it together is kind of one picture of mentorship that I'll be sure to kind of to embrace as I see that happening. But
yeah, absolutely. No, it's glad I have not been able to watch it. It is on my list to get to here coming up. Now, Bonnie, I do appreciate you joining the show for today. And before we close, want to make sure folks know how to contact you. So in particular, I know how to contact you and learn more about the Clinician-Leader. So this is now the actual final question for you. How can they contact you? How can they learn about the Clinician-Leader?
Love it. Yeah. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at the Clinician-Leader, no spaces, all one word. So you can find us there, or you can contact us at hello@theclinicianleader.com, and we'll be happy to connect with you.
Excellent. Well, Bonnie, thanks for joining our conversation today. I really enjoyed it. And I think it's something that really, truly is important for pharmacy here and now, but also for the future going forward. We are living in a changing world of healthcare, and it's going to become more and more essential that pharmacists are really, tactful and skilled at these communication and leadership skills. It comes in a lot of different forms. So just because you see one person do it one way doesn't mean you need to do it that same way. So I really love the training and the context that you described here today. Now, that is all for our podcast today. But for our listeners, we want to make sure you continue to engage with the PQS Quality Corner Show. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a question or topic, please let us know. Similarly, if you have a topic and would like to come on the show and talk about it, we would love to hear about that. So you can DM us directly on Twitter at Pharmacy Quality or by emailing info@pharmacyquality.com. Now, with that, I appreciate you listening to the Quality Corner Show. And there is one final message from the PQS team.
The Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show has a request for you. Our goal is to spread the word about how quality measurement can help improve health outcomes, and we need your help in sharing this podcast to friends and colleagues in the healthcare industry. We also want you to provide feedback, ask us questions, and suggest health topics you'd like to see covered. If you are a health expert and you want to contribute to the show or even talk on the show, please contact us. You can email info@pharmacyquality.com. Let us know what is on your mind, what we can address, so that you are fully informed. We want you to be able to provide the best care for your patients and members, and we wish all of you listeners out there well.